Good morning, students, and welcome to this morning's presentation for Educational Foundations 1. I'm Ms. Isabel Besaidenout, and I'm going to look at some of the important information from this module, specifically in view of the assignment that you have to hand in for next year. First of all, I want to look at what this module entails. Now, the module should enable you to develop a theoretical understanding, values and competencies as the foundation of your education in becoming an educator. You should also be able to understand the role that the history of education, comparative education, international development, colonial education, reforms and policies played in transforming education as we know it today. The module is compiled of different chapters that will explain the importance and contributions of different perspectives, systems and factors that shaped the Namibian education system. Although these things are discussed as separate issues, you should see that it's not necessarily separated in the classroom reality. That means you should integrate the knowledge of the different chapters to achieve a holistic view on teaching practices. Now, when we go to Unit 1, we see that it deals with comparative education. Now, what is comparative education? It is the comparative study of educational theories and practices in various countries, and it attempts to use cross-national data to test prepositions about the relationship between education and society and between teaching practices and learning outcomes. It also considers the implications of comparative studies for the formation and implementation of policies in education and social, national and international development. And lastly, it invites contributions from associated disciplines like the fields of the government, management, sociology and technology and communications, all of these which affect educational research and policy decisions. When we look at the evolution of comparative education, we see that there were 7 phases, each of which is discussed in detail in the study guide. Now, the first phase was the phase of traveler's tales, the second, one of systematic data collection for borrowing, the third, international cooperation, the fourth, the hermeneutic phase, then the social science phase. The sixth phase was one of heterodoxy, and the last was one of heterogeneity. Like I said, each of these are discussed, and you should have at least a small background of each of these phases that you take note of. When we come to Unit 2, we see that this deals with the contribution of different educational philosophers throughout the ages, but I'm only going to concentrate on 2. The first that I want us to look at is John Dewey's contribution to the education system. Now, he believed that the key to intellectual development and consequently to social progress was schooling, especially at a time when the educational influences of the home had decreased very drastically. He stressed the social and the moral nature of the school, and he believed that it should serve as a miniature community, especially one that actively fostered the growth of democracy, which was being undermined by the urban industrial society of that time. His model of education was in stark contrast to the factory system model being adopted by school planners and the efficiency experts, which emphasized students as relatively passive raw materials to be molded by teachers. The educators of those time also believed in repetitious methods of teaching and subject matter that was divorced from a social content. So in that sense, it was very necessary that there was a new education that had to come alive, one that was guided by the perspective that school is life rather than a preparation for it. Therefore, Dewey also believed that the best preparation for democracy was to provide opportunities for students and teachers to be actively engaged in democratic life. He also believed that the most effective curriculum was one that attended to the present interests of children, not as a motivational strategy, but a way to teach the essential relationship between human knowledge and social experience. He also criticized public schools for silencing or ignoring student interests and experiences, for using artificial language that only served to alienate the students. Furthermore, he did not agree with the over-relying on testing to assess student learning according to their presumed ability to partake in mental or manual learning, instead of offering both to all. And he also criticized the isolating of subjects from one another instead of uniting them around students' life experiences with knowledge. Some of the principles that Dewey believed in was that freedom for the child in the classroom should not be an end in itself. This disputes with some of the child-centered educators in part illustrates his long-held antipathy toward dichotomous thinking and absolute principles. Now here on the slide I want to interrupt myself. You see that I've given you the explanations of two of these very difficult words. And saying that, I want to really caution you that when you do the assignments and when you prepare for the examination, that you really take effort to go and see what the words mean that you are dealing with. Have a dictionary next to you. There are a lot of difficult terms, difficult vocabulary that's used. Make a note each time that you are unsure of what some of the words means. Let's continue. His attempt was not to find a compromise, but rather to reconstruct the debate so that they were no longer viewed as opposites. To him, it was not a question of choice between validating the interests of the child or the subject matter in constructing the curriculum, but it was rather of understanding and developing the continuum of experiences that links them. He also advocated it taking on the role of helping in the transformation to a better social order. He recognized the nature of class barriers and distinctions, and he argued that schools should help in the elimination. It did not follow, according to him, that the school's role in the enhancement of social life in general and the evils of capitalism in particular should include the teaching of any kind of economic or socialism. Though the study of an active engagement in basic social activities such as growing food, cooking, building a shelter, making clothing, creating stories and artwork, children could best be initiated into moral social membership. They would thus be provided with opportunities to learn the instruments of effective self-direction, as well as a sensitivity towards social issues and the ability to act on them. The classroom was to become a place that would embrace the kind of democratic community life, concern for human dignity, scientific intelligence that was sought outside the school was important to him. The means were in fact the ends. The application of creative and scientific inquiry to social problems was as far as Dewey would go. And to conclude, indeed, his present-oriented and experimentalist perspective tended to result in rather vague descriptions of alternatives to strive for, because he sought to avoid all blueprints that were class-based or otherwise. Another very influential educational philosopher was Julius Nyerere. Now, if we look at his views of adult education and lifelong learning, we see the following. In the Declaration of Dar es Salaam, he made a ringing call for adult education to be directed at helping people to help themselves and for it to be approached as part of life, integrated with life and inseparable from it. For him, adult education had two functions. One was to inspire a desire for change and an understanding that this change was possible. And the second was helping people to make their own decisions and to implement those decisions for themselves. His view of adult education stretched far beyond the classroom. It was anything that enlarges man's understanding, could activate him, help him to make his own decision and implement those decisions for himself, and it included agitation, organization, as well as mobilization. He believed that there were two types of educators involved. One was the generalists, and they consisted of the community development workers, the political activists, and religious people, the teachers who were not politically neutral, and they affected how people looked at society and how they seek to use or change it. Then he also believed that there were the specialists, and they were the ones concerned with health, agriculture, childcare, management, and literacy. Nyerere believed that adult education did not have a beginning or an end. He said living is learning, and learning is about trying to live better. In terms of methods, two aspects stood out for him. Educators do not give something they possess to another, but they help the learner to develop his or her own potential and capacity. He also said that those that the educators work with have their own experience and knowledge about the subjects that they are interested in, although they sometimes do not realize it. Drawing on the things the learner already knows and showing their relevance to the new thing that has to be learned, the teacher accomplishes the following three things. 1. He builds up the self-confidence of the man who wants to learn by showing him he is capable of contributing. Secondly, he has demonstrated the relevance of experience and observation as a method of learning when combined with thought and analysis. And in the third place, he shows what one might call a mutuality of learning. That is, that by sharing our knowledge, we extend the totality of our understanding and our control over our own lives. This brings us to Unit 3, and the specific focus here is on the consequences for teachers of the following principles and objectives, specifically as set out by UNESCO regarding education. In other words, I want you to consider these principles and objectives and think how it influences our rights and responsibilities as teachers. In the first place, it says that it's the fundamental right of every child to have full educational opportunities, and that attention should be paid to special education needs. There should be facilities available equally for every person to enjoy education without any discrimination. Education is fundamentally important to the general public. In that sense, the state should provide adequate schools, free education, and material assistance to needy pupils. Furthermore, education should not interfere with the liberty of the parents or the legal guardians to choose children's school, neither with anyone's freedom to establish and direct educational institutions which conform to the minimum educational standard of the state. Furthermore, education is essential to economic growth. Educational planning should be part of economic and social planning to improve living conditions, and education is a continuous process, so teaching should be coordinated to improve the quality of education and to enhance the teacher's status. There should be free access to a flexible system of schools and no restrictions to a child's opportunities to progress. And the state should strive for quality, not just quantity. Both long-term and short-term planning and programming are necessary, and integration in the community of pupils will depend more on future needs than on present requirements. Furthermore, if we look at educational planning, it should include provision for training and further training of teachers who know their people and teach in their mother tongue. There should be coordinated, systematic and continuing research and action of teacher preparation and in-service training, which is essential. It should include cooperative projects and international level. The authorities, teachers, employers, workers, parents, cultural organizations and institutions of learning and research should cooperate closely to define educational objectives. To achieve the aims and objectives of education largely, of course, depends on the funds available. Therefore, countries should set aside an adequate to develop education. We move over to Unit 4. Now here the focus lies on how can we today understand Namibia's current socio-economic problems, and we need to look at a few factors in order to put things in perspective. And the first thing is, of course, Namibia's colonial history. We know the German colony of Southwest Africa during World War I and administered it as a mandate until after World War II. In 1966, SWAPO launched a war of independence for the area which was soon to be named Namibia. And in 1988, South Africa agreed to end its administration in accordance with a UN peace plan for the entire region. In 1990, following multi-party elections and the establishment of a constitution. President Sam Nujoma was the country's first and founding president, who handed over the presidency in 2005 to President Hifikepunye Pohamba, who was sworn in on the 21st of March 2005. Now, according to your guide, that is not, it was just at the time of print. So please make a correction there. The geography of Namibia, what is important? That we are located in the southwestern part of Africa, bordering the South Atlantic Ocean, with Angola in the north, Zambia in the northeast, Botswana in the east, and South Africa in the south. Our geographic coordinates are 22 degrees. The country covers a very large area of 825,480 square kilometers. We have a desert climate that is generally hot and dry, with sparse and erratic rainfall. When we look at our population, we see that in 2004 it was estimated that Namibia's population was around 1.95 million people. These estimates took into consideration the effects of mortality due to HIV/AIDS, which results in a lower life expectancy. It also took in account higher infant mortality and death rate, lower population growth rates, as well as the distribution of population by age and sex. The growth rate at 1.25%. Over the last 10 years, so that would be also at the time of print, the population grew at an average of 1.5% per year. So it grew from 1.8 million in 2001 to 2.1 million in 2011. And we are already in 2017. So we must all a bit outdated as they are in your study guide. What is of importance is if we think of the growth rate at the time, it was said to be 4% lower than that was expected, and that most likely was closely linked to the high prevalence of HIV and AIDS. Yet, the NPC director considered the growth good and manageable in comparison to the country's economic growth, 10% at that time over the last decade. In Unit 5, there's one particular aspect that I want you to take note of, This is now especially when you complete the assignment. What do we mean if we say that it's a knowledge-based society? First of all, we mean that the characteristics are that effective and wise use of existing knowledge as well as the creation of new knowledge. A knowledge-based society underlines sharing and using of knowledge effectively through a dynamic information infrastructure. It also uses high-level technology and research to create innovations and sustainable development for people and the environment. It also has a flourishing entrepreneurship in a growing production-based economy and equity. And it takes its place in the context of globalization, where it's important not only to have knowledge and skills, but also to have a strong identity and values as an individual, a culture, and a nation as a whole. The concept of knowledge thus embraces indigenous knowledge as well as international and global culture. Only with a strong cultural and individual identity and positive values, we will be able to influence globalization and not be overwhelmed by it. In a Namibian context, it includes the strong collaborative culture, which is the characteristic of our African society. The path to a knowledge-based society with a strong identity and culture is not achieved through basic education alone, but very importantly through lifelong learning. And this lifelong learning starts at home. It continues through early childhood education, then through basic education and further. How is it developed? Through informal, non-formal as well as formal modes of learning. By reaching everyone in society, basic education has the greatest potential for laying the foundation. We move over to Unit 6, where we look at the society features and issues and Namibia's educational systems that has the ability to address social goals, broad access and equity. For instance, through general education, we can ensure that important social messages regarding HIV and AIDS information are learned. In secondary education, for instance, there are many positive externalities such as improved health, reduced infant mortality, better family planning, HIV and AIDS prevention, and enhanced social participation. Also, through more and better secondary education for girls, we can see that we can empower. Education also increases the average earnings and productivity and reduces the likelihood of social problems that are harmful for economic development. Now, if we look at again the history or the circumstances that we have in Namibia, we see that many children in Namibia have been victims of war, poverty, overcrowded housing, inadequate food supply, polluted water, lack of sanitary facilities and isolation. We also see there's malaria, diarrhea, acute respiratory infections and measles, which are all preventable diseases. Though Namibia is one of the wealthiest countries in sub-Saharan Africa, our malnutrition level is 29%, which is only slightly lower than the average for this region. We have the highest malnutrition level for any country in the world among the 83 countries whose GNP per capita income is higher than $1,000. A household health and nutrition survey conducted by UNICEF in the northwest region in Katatura found a high to moderate malnutrition rate of 30% and a severe malnutrition rate of 6.8%. Now, why are we mentioning these facts? Because we want to look at how education can eradicate these circumstances. The main influence of the situation on the educational system is the effect these things have on curriculum revision. The school curricula is revised to strengthen the cross-curricular themes like HIV/AIDS and health education, environmental education, information communication technologies, and entrepreneurial skill development, as well as the acquisition of literacy, numeracy, and life skills. And on senior secondary level, there's an emphasis on the localization of the HEXI curriculum in order to ensure that it's more relevant in its local application. We also look at teacher education curricula that is offered at the colleges of education and the University of Namibia, and we see that it will be revised once the revision for this formal school system has been done. This will be done to ensure that the education curricula is aligned and responsive to the needs and the requirements of the school curricula. Then I also want to lift out one more very important education. It really is a buzzword in education at the moment, so let's just see that we really are familiar with this term. Inclusive education differs from previously held notions of integration and mainstreaming in the sense that it's concerned principally with disability and special educational needs, and it implies learners changing or becoming ready or deserving of accommodation by the mainstream. It is concerned with the child's rights to participate and the school's duty to accept the child. It rejects the use of special schools or classrooms to separate students with disabilities from students without disabilities. A premium is placed upon full participation by students with disabilities and also upon respect for civil and educational rights. And lastly, it aims to give students with disabilities skills that they can use in and outside the classroom. That brings us to the end, but now I want us to quickly go through what you should keep in mind when you do your assignment. The first thing is take note of the action verbs, because they show you the thinking of verbs in the beginning of your guide that you really need to look at, and you have to see that you understand each of these action verbs if you find them in a question. Section 7 in the beginning of the study guide, to be specific. You get action verbs such as analyze, examine, and evaluate, for instance. Now, when you see these, you know that your own input is needed in addition to what the study guide says, because these kind of questions ask an opinion of you. It asks you to make a certain judgment and to draw a conclusion based on the facts. So if you only give the information from the study guide, you will not get the full marks here. Something else that's important with every question, you are not supposed to copy every single word from the guide just as it is, without changing the meaning. That means put it in your own words. Very important, write full, grammatically correct sentences. In the exam and in the assignment, I use bullet points on my slides or numbers on the slides, but you are supposed to write in paragraph form if it's an answer that requires a long. You'll see in the assignment that the questions correspond with the units. So if it's question 1, you know the information will be found in unit 1. Question 2 will be in unit 2, question 3 in unit 3, etc. I hope that is clear to you then. I want to end off with my contact details. As I said, my name is Isabel Besaidenhout, and you are very welcome to phone me or phone you back. I want to request that you SMS the subject code to me, that I know in what relation I should call you back, as I have more than one subject. Then of course you are also very welcome to send me an email if you need advice or help with anything. Best of luck, students, and please start rather earlier than later, especially with this subject that has a lot of difficult words and terminology. Thank you and goodbye.